Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Let me just give another brief introduction and thank Ruth Moore and her family, her husband and her daughter, for joining us today. She is a MST survivor who fought the VBA system, as we're about to hear, for many years before she was finally service-connected. They made the long trip down from Maine, and I want to correct the record here. I share Ruth Moore with Congressman Michoud. She actually lives in his district, but we were able to speak with her soon after we introduced the piece of legislation, and have been happy to be in contact with her and really appreciated her telling her story. For 25 years, Ruth has had to battle with the Navy, the VA, and frankly, her own memories. I don't think many of us can truly appreciate all of what she and her family have been through, and I totally appreciate how brave she is to come with us today and tell her story. It's not an easy thing to do, but I think Ruth would say she knows if she keeps silent, and if all of the survivors of MST are silent, the problem will never go away. I appreciate your courage in coming here today, and I want to add one last thing. Our local newspaper wrote a story about Ruth last week, and when the reporter asked her her biggest fear about testifying, she said that they will never hear the words, that they will hear my words but won't understand the depth of it. Well, I want you to know you're in good hands. This is a committee that cares deeply about this issue. I appreciate your holding the hearing today, and I appreciate you inviting Congressman Michoud and my constituent to join us today. Thank you very much, Ruth.
Let's thank the gentlelady, and with that, we will recognize Ms. Moore for her testimony. You are now recognized.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ruth Moore, and it is an honor to be among you today. As you know, I'm a military sexual trauma survivor who lives with PTSD and depression. I am here today to share my 23-year struggle to get help from the Veterans Health Administration and disability compensation from the Veterans Benefits Administration. In 1987, I was a bright, vivacious 18-year-old serving in the United States Navy. After my training school, my first assignment was to an overseas duty station in Europe. 2.5 months after I arrived, I was raped by my supervisor outside of the local club, not once, but twice. I sought help from the chaplain, but did not receive any. I tried to move beyond this nightmare, but had contracted an STD. At this point, my life spiraled downward, and I attempted suicide. Shortly thereafter, I was medevaced to Bethesda Naval Hospital and ultimately discharged from the Navy. No prosecution was ever made against my perpetrator. In hindsight, it was easier for the military to get rid of me than to admit to the rape. My problems began at the point of separation, as the psychiatrist diagnosed me with a borderline personality disorder. I did not have a borderline personality disorder. This was the standard diagnosis that was given to all MST survivors at that time, to separate them from active duty and protect the military from any and all liability. This travesty continued when I was counseled by outprocessing to waive all claims to the VA, as I would get health care through my former spouse who was on active duty. From 1987 to 1993, I struggled with interpersonal relationships, could not trust male supervisors, and could not maintain employment. I filed my first VA claim in Jacksonville, which was denied, despite having several markers for PTSD and gynecological issues. My life continued to spiral downward, and I was not able to maintain my marriage. In 1997, I fled from my house and lived out of my van for 2 weeks before I was able to start rebuilding my life with my present spouse. Things were very difficult, and I developed additional markers of PTSD, including night terrors, panic attacks, severe migraines, and insomnia. In 2003, I filed for disability and was denied again. However, I enlisted the aid of the Disabled American Veterans. With their help, I was awarded 30% compensation for depression. I was denied PTSD and was told that I did not submit enough evidence to prove that I was raped, despite having submitted a letter from my former spouse who remembered the rape and the chlamydia. Given this eyewitness testimony, the VA still denied this as credible proof. There was no record of my medical treatment for STD from that duty station, as my medical records had been expunged. Additionally, I was coded by Togus VA as having a traumatic brain injury or brain syndrome. In 2009, I entered into my first comprehensive treatment at the VA hospital in White River Junction, Vermont. I met an MST coordinator who truly listened to me. She began a systemic review of my records and determined that they had been expunged by noting the glaring inconsistencies between my lab work notes and service record. My psychiatrist and counselor determined that I did not have borderline personality disorder nor traumatic brain syndrome. My MST coordinator and I refiled for an increase in disability, and my clinicians wrote supportive records for the VBA to make an accurate determination. They re-adjudicated my claim to 70%, but denied my status as individually unemployable, citing that I did not complete the necessary paperwork. At this point, I was very frustrated and suicidal with the stresses of the VBA system and claims process. In my final effort, I called the Honorable Bernie Sanders, and his staff agreed to investigate why the VA was taking so long in denying my claim. I took Mr. Sanders copies of all the paperwork I had filed, including the VBA time and date stamped missing information. Within 2 weeks, my claim was finally adjudicated to 70% with IU, and it was total and permanent. My rating should have been 100% by the VBI criteria, but I was so grateful for a favorable determination that I have not pursued it. Ladies and gentlemen, this process took me 23 years to resolve, and I'm one of the fortunate ones. It should not be this way. If I had been treated promptly and received benefits in a timely manner back at the time of my discharge, my life would have been much different. I would not have had to endure homelessness and increased symptomology to the point where I was suicidal. I would not have miscarried 9 children, and I firmly believe that I would have been able to develop better coping and social skills. Instead, my quality of life has been degraded to the point where I'm considering the possibility of getting a service animal to relieve the stress that my husband endures as my unpaid caretaker. I'm asking you, no, I'm pleading with you, to please favorably consider the legislation that would prevent this from happening to others. Congresswoman Pingree's legislation is one way to change the burden of proof that is required to enable MST survivors to receive proper adjudication for MST and PTSD. Please do what is right. Support this legislation. It is urgently needed. And thank you for your time and audience today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moore, and we truly do appreciate you being here. And once you volunteered to serve our nation through the armed services, but you being here today and continuing to share your story, you're continuing to serve by shining a light on this. Sharing your experience, to us is only going to help us make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else. And I know you've endured some horrific challenges, as you just discussed, in your time in the military and in your personal life after that. And I'm kind of choked up. I mean, I just really again would thank you for being here today.